Welcome back to the programme. Now, we heard earlier about the arrests in Australia of people suspected of planning so-called demonstration killings. That's thought to mean beheadings. The plans were apparently encouraged by an Australian who's a senior member of the Islamic State, as it calls itself. Just another example of the influence the IS seems to have, even far away from its bases in Iraq and Syria. Let's have a look at the figures. It's thought there could be around 2,000 Westerners fighting with IS. Of that figure of 2,000, up to 500 of them come from the UK, it's believed. The Australian government says around 150 of its citizens have been or are currently overseas fighting with extremists in Iraq and Syria. The US Defence Secretary Chuck Hagel, though, says around 100 Americans have joined IS. That's a smaller proportion than from so many European countries. Well, let's just talk about why this might be, because joining me from Washington is Tarin, the director of the Washington, D.C. office of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Tarin, thanks very much indeed for joining us. A very complex answer, possibly. We don't quite know why, but can you give us a straightforward version of your view as to why it should be that so far, so few Muslims from the US are making that journey?
Well, I think, David, number one, the IS or ISIL message or rhetoric does not resonate with American Muslims. American Muslims have a very different experience, both the indigenous and the immigrant communities. They are extremely well socially and economically integrated into American society and have strong institutions, both civic and politically and religiously, to counter the influence or the rhetoric that ISIL or other groups like ISIL might have domestically in the U.S. And this has been the case with ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and all other groups. Their influence on American Muslims have been completely minimal because of the strong integration and strong engagement of American Muslim institutions.
Okay, that's interesting, because I know a lot of countries across Europe would say, we feel that we integrate pretty well. Nonetheless, I suppose part of it is a perception as to what a Muslim might be bringing to a country, and do you think that perhaps we're more gripped by security concerns than you are?
Well, I think the security concerns are pretty similar. I think the U.S. post 9/11 has had major security concerns, and to a certain extent, that has impacted negatively the American Muslim experience, which has securitized the relationship. But I think if you look at the difference between American Muslims and European communities, you can easily see the case that the integration process is very different. In America, we have a history of being a nation of immigrants. Everyone in America at some point was an immigrant. Each community came through, each community integrated into society and built institutions. I think in Europe it's a bit different. There's a bit more closer ties to countries of origin for Muslim communities. The economic and social integration is a bit different, the level of education, and marginalization of society, of communities, especially by far-right parties who are anti-immigration and anti-immigrant, causes a lot of self-marginalization and a feeling of not being part of society.
Do you think there's also a geographical issue? I mean, let's face it, we are much closer than you are.
Yes, that's definitely a reason. I think the Atlantic Ocean has a large part to do with it. I think so. You know, physical location, economic issues, social issues, all of these join to make a different experience for American Muslims and European Muslims.
Well, it's good to speak to you, Tarin, joining us from Washington. Many thanks.
Thank you.